equally as important to resting heart rate would be, what is my heart rate doing during exercise? And so a lot of people will interpret that in different ways. That might be, oh my gosh, I deadlifted for the first time and I happened to look down at my watch and my heart rate was 162. I'm like, what happened? Did I do cardio? Like, that's the thought. It's just that, first of all, no, there's just different physiologic adaptations occurring. It's not cardio. Contracting muscles in general, it's just will portend a whole different set of benefit and changes.
Right.
What I use it for is specifically, stating the obvious, would be more cardiovascular training, more endurance training. And we talked a little bit about heart rate zones and that sort of thing in past episodes. So for maybe a deeper discussion on that, that's probably the place to go. But in general, if you're going for a walk, it's going to measure your heart rate. If you're on a bike, it's going to measure your heart rate. If you're running, it's measuring your heart rate. So not that you need to look at it 100% of the time.
Right.
You can use it to track a trend over time. So at this effort that I felt, it was a 10-minute pace that I was running at, or it was a 16-minute pace I was walking at.
Mm-hmm.
In December, my heart rate got all the way up to 145 at that pace. And then in February, it was at that same pace. I look back, my heart rate was only 136. And so in the same way, you want to see your resting heart rate maybe dip a little bit over time to reflect higher fitness. That's potentially what you'll be seeing in the actual work that you're doing. You'll see yourself doing running or walking at the same speed at a lower heart rate is a good way to say, is the last 8 weeks of my exercise, is it doing anything for the things that I care about, my health primarily?
Right.
So another way to look at trends. The second thing, if you're more interested in, nerding out a little bit, or you're more interested in trying to just take the objective measures of effort and use them to compare with subjective measures of effort, you could say, in the same examples of running and walking, you could say, okay, that felt like a RPE. There's a bunch of different RPE scales. That felt like a 6 out of 10. But I look back and my heart rate was 170 the whole time. And you're like, it wasn't that hard though.
Right.
I would say, who the heck cares? Like, did it feel good? Great. You could probably keep doing that and eventually it'll probably go down.
Right.
Then there are a lot of people who they refuse to tap into how did that feel, and they'll go out there and run, and they'll go out there and walk or bike, and they'll just push it to 170 no matter what. And they'll just say, I don't care. Even though my heart was 150, my legs were on fire and it was a 10 out of 10, but no pain, no gain.
Right.
There's, again, the key message there is objective measures, great. Even better when you're using them with a subjective measure of your effort.
Using them together.
Use them in tandem, because on every given, if you're in this for the long haul and you just spent $400 on your watch, use both of those things. Don't just because you got all these fancy tools, throw out how you're feeling and what the day brought and how you've been sleeping and your life stressors. Like, there's a way to kind of,
because there are days when you're off.
There are,
and there's days when you're on, and I've in my short time trying to take care of myself, I've already felt that, where one day you go in and you hit a personal record on something and you're like, wow, that didn't feel bad at all.
Right.
And then 2 weeks later, you go to do the same thing and you can't crack, 80% of that without feeling like you're going to die. So absolutely, it makes sense that you need to do both at the same time. Exactly.
And so the final layer to that, focusing a little more objectively, again, if you wanted to nerd out, let's say, you've been doing some conditioning, you went from walking to jogging to now you have some days where you run harder.
Yep.
You could say, all right, I'm going to look at these heart rate zones.
Yeah.
And I'm going to keep an eye on this as I'm going and try to stay in a given zone, because I know that there are different adaptations that can occur across these different zones.
Right.
Not throwing out the subjective measures, but there's a way to tailor your training, maybe with some help of a coach, or do a little reading. But again, these are not perfect measurements of heart rate either, but they're generally pretty accurate.
Right.
And a lot of people will add a heart rate monitor to, like a heart rate strap that they'll wear on their chest.
Yeah.
And it'll just feed the data to the watch and then
doubles it up.
Yes. And so that's, a way to make it more accurate depending on, it's like anything.
Yeah.
How deep in the weeds do you want to get lost? You could take this very far just with heart rate.
Yeah.
But I use it, to sort of hone in on these different heart rate zones because I want my easy days of aerobic work. I want the heart rate data that I get. I want that to reflect that, so that when I look back, it's like, you know what? In the last 6 months, I did 100 hours of, this kind of work.
Right.
And there's no confusion.
Yeah.
I wasn't in zone 5 all those days when I thought I was doing a bunch of zone 2 work. Like you want to develop a lot of these systems in isolation. In the same way, you want to maybe focus on lifting with, your back musculature or your lower legs. You want to focus on the different aerobic and anaerobic zones.
Nothing is wasted.
Right.
But when you're trying to target something, you want to be able to target that thing.
And it can help you. Yes. And it can help you shape your weekly exercise too by focusing on things more isolated.